Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay in the back? Awesome, thank you very much. So thank you for joining our session here on Allscript's Prescription for Key Account Planning Success. I had to read the title, I couldn't remember what it was. So my name's Tim Braman. I run corporate strategy for Revegy, which is the technology company that's supporting Shad's initiative here. And we're going to do the monkey and the organ grinder thing here, so I'm just going to ask him questions, and he's going to do all the real work. But I'd like to introduce Shad Williams from Allscript. Shad is a longtime healthcare IT veteran. Started his career in 1998 with Cerner, held a variety of positions there, and then moved on to become president of a healthcare IT company called SurgeMD that was successfully sold a few years ago. After that, he moved on to start a position on the cabinet within Allscripts Corporation. So a longtime healthcare IT leader. And Shad's going to talk today about their journey to account planning technology. So I'm just going to ask a few questions, leading questions, of course. And he's going to go ahead and give his unsolicited answers. At this point, as you can tell by the lack of hair or the follically challenged guys up front, we're 90% scar tissue. Nothing you say will hurt. Ask any question, feel free, okay? You know, we've got an agenda because an agenda slide is mandatory according to the SAMA rules, so there's our prescribed SAMA slide. I'd like to turn it over to Shad now to talk a little bit about who Allscripts is and the customers that they serve. So Shad?
Okay, thank you, Tim. Appreciate the monkey grinding picture in my mind. I'm the monkey, I guess, is how this works. Is anybody represented here representing the healthcare information technology industry? Terrific, a couple people. Okay, terrific. Are you familiar with Allscripts? Okay, great, thank you. Allscripts is a public company based in Chicago. We have offices in Raleigh, Atlanta, Pune, England, Canada. We have about 8,500 associates. Roughly $1.5 billion in revenue. We're publicly traded under NASDAQ. MDRX is our symbol. We were founded in 1987, and we were founded primarily, as the name implies, Allscripts. We were founded as kind of an e-prescribing company, and from there, through acquisitions, et cetera, we grew into the businesses that you see represented here today. So we offer electronic health records in ambulatory and the acute setting. We also have a great business in the post-acute business, in the post-acute world. So what that means is like home health. Once you're discharged from the hospital, home health. We've spent a great deal of time in the last 5 years, and there's been significant acquisitions around the consumer and in the community. So when I say consumer, I mean each of you probably through your primary care physician has been pushed an invitation to join the patient portal that your provider is offering. So we do patient portal kinds of things. And then we also work with pharma and payers, and we're really involved in the transaction of moving money from place to place. And unfortunately, as we're all well aware, the most expensive piece of healthcare is the moving of money from place to place. And there's if you follow the money, there's a number of what I like to call baron robbers just along the way that take a piece of your dollar as the transaction moves through the process. Our goal is to streamline that process, try to make the expense of healthcare lower than it is today, and ultimately, generate benefit back to the patient through our client-facing and patient-facing tools. So that's Allscripts. Again, about 8,500 associates, and we have about 600 that are client-facing. So a fair number are actually in the field every day working with clients. From a people that we touch standpoint, $7.2 million 7.2 million people have enrolled in our portal, which is a significant number. 2,500 hospitals, 12 million referrals. So when I talk about the post-acute setting, one of the ways that we can really drive out costs is to ensure that when you enter the health system, that you actually have all of your care delivered within that system. One of the things that drives up our costs is, and I say ours as like Americans, costs is whenever we venture out of our networks, it just gets more expensive for everybody. So one of our tools will basically connect everybody that's in that network so that we can manage the referrals. So once you're referring outside of your network, it's a real problem. So we want to contain that. And the idea that we've got 12 million referrals within our network is significant. 45,000 physicians, and from a market share standpoint, we're probably number 3 in terms of market share, and that's inclusive of acute and ambulatory. So we've got a pretty good footprint.
Awesome, thanks.
So this picture, and Tim and I have talked about this. Tim built this for us after hearing the Allscript story and how we grew. This represents the major acquisitions that we've undertaken in the last 10 years or so. And I'm proud of the acquisitions. They're terrific tools, but I have this like inherent bias that the world would be just an amazing place if we organically grew all of these systems ourselves, and they came out of some amazing story from a genius developer that was in our IT shop. But the fact of the matter is, to get where we need to go, we've acquired key pieces along the way. And there are 4 or 5 major acquisitions that we've made. The most recent is DB Motion and a company called Jardogs. Prior to that, a company called Eclipsys, and then Misys. And all of these were electronic health records companies that we've since combined into 3 products. But as a result, we have different client bases. We have different cultures, different client bases, different languages that speak to those different clients. And it's presented the unique problem for us is we're trying to understand exactly what our client is saying, how we assess the health of our client, and the way that we manage those clients on a weekly and quarterly basis was frankly different between all of these different orgs that were put together into one. And so candidly, that's what led us to the need for a tool like Revegy, because we did not have a standard way of operating.
And Shad actually didn't want to show this slide because he does have this penchant for wanting to grow organically. And I said it's probably a lot like everybody else in the audience, right? A lot of companies that are represented here within SAMA have grown through acquisitions, whether it's regionalized acquisitions internationally or otherwise. So I said to him, it's probably very real world for a lot of you. This is the kind of some of the initial stuff that came to light here as the process. So see, these are some of the bad things that happened that your team shared with us. A couple of the things that I'd like you to talk about specifically here is the lifetime journey of understanding the customer throughout their life, and then some of the insights that the fact that you had all these different languages, this Tower of Babel from all the acquisitions.
Yeah, okay, great. So today I'm area vice president and I own all of our clients in the South, but for the past year and a half, I was responsible for what's called the Allscripts Outcomes Executives Program. And this was our version of strategic account management. And so I was responsible for that creation and delivery. And so that's how Tim and I met originally, and the need for a tool came out of us building that plan, that program. And in that role, invariably, one of the first things that I would be asked, it seems like every Monday or before any internal corporate meeting, was we need to understand what's happening across the client base, whether it be who's satisfied and who's not, what the white space is, who owns, and we had some level of automation via Salesforce, but we had no quick way to get to accurate data. And that happened because from a regional standpoint, each region operated differently than the other regions. So the Northeast had a different white space report than the West, even to the extent that some products were called different names, which gets really interesting when you're trying to standardize things and understand what your white space is. So whenever we're really just trying to assess what we have and didn't have, it became difficult. We could do it, but not without a lot of manual intervention. And frankly, these lists had to be updated regularly. It was like a corporate imperative. All the sales people need to spend 1 day out of this particular week refreshing all of the data in the standalone spreadsheets that each region had. And it was a mess. And the irony of it is that we're an IT company. I mean, our goal is to have one patient record for everyone in America, ideally. We were not adhering to the virtues of the systems that we sell, which is the irony of it. And so we went through the same, when we go into a physician office or a health system, we're completely disrupting the provider's practice because typically they're on paper. The lab is fragmented from radiology, and pharmacy is a different beast altogether. So we want to harmonize all of those different environments, those different businesses. We were doing the same thing at Allscript, and so we got to go through some of the pain of that, the cultural pain, the technology pain, all the stuff that you go through. But that was kind of the environment, really. Sure. I think this slide probably lays it all out. We from a language and even from a sales methodology and standardized client-facing approach, we were really all over the map. We have one fellow on the West Coast thought that he was a strategic selling guy, and so everything that he did really focused on strategic selling and the blue sheets. Well, the guys in the Northeast, they've been around for a while. They've been through all the strategic selling classes. They've customized their own system, and so we've used Revegy to standardize.
And when you made the decision here, you made the decision to actually go out because you are an IT company and you have, I think you told me you have like 50 Salesforcecom programmers or IT type resources. Mm-hmm. You had to make a decision: do we build something versus do we buy something? Yeah. So what were some of the pros and cons of both sides? So
yeah, that was the internal. Our CIO was probably split on the decision, and a CIO never wants to add more projects. That's for sure, especially with his competing resources. But we do have a bunch of smart Salesforce people. But one of the key evidences we used as we were going through this process to justify the expense was to really look at the evidence of our development so far, and I'm pointing towards development in Salesforce, because we have an enormous Salesforce infrastructure. It's several different instances that have been merged into one. So a bunch of accounts from our Mises acquisition were merged into our Salesforce instance, and so it's created some variances just in terms of what data we're tracking from one client base to the other. We've tried to merge all of that together, and along the way we've added all kinds of fields. And so when you look at our face sheet in Salesforce, you scroll 4 or 5 times and there are a number of fields and data elements that if they're kept up, that's a really good thing, but many of them are out of date, many of them aren't relevant, and even more are frankly they're blank. So our data was spotty at best. And we decided before we proclaim ourselves experts in building an account management tool, we should go through the process to find out what's out there. And so we assessed 4 providers initially. There was heavy focus on several of them regarding methodology, so it was primarily a consulting service where they wanted to come in and help us define our sales process and really start at the ground level. We, in our wisdom, thought we were smart enough that we've got our sales process figured out, we understand methodology, and we're so good kind of stuff, that we just wanted the tool. So we went straight for the tool and adapted our methodology to the tool. We talked about this, Tim and I have talked about this, that's probably a mistake that we made. I wish if we could do it over again, that we would have paid more attention to the consulting effort around ensuring that our sales process is what we think it is. I mean, we have all kinds of definitions of sales stage and et cetera, but do we actually follow those in practice? The real answer is we don't. Salespeople, most of the good ones, frankly, they're good because they find ways outside of whatever process is being prescribed, and they can get to the end much quicker and without having to go through all the paces. While at the same point, from a management standpoint, we want to be able to track every single stage of the deal and of client satisfaction along the way. So we decided we weren't good at that. Revegy presents a tool that it was already built, it looks good, it takes all your information from Salesforce and it migrates it to the Revegy tool, so it's really just there. And it's an integrated piece as well. So we're not having to log into Salesforce and then log into Revegy. So now when we go to our face sheet in Salesforce, we make 2 scrolls and we actually see the Revegy client plan. And we didn't feel like we could build all of that, and certainly we didn't think we could do it in a cost-efficient way, or in a time frame that would allow us to get moving very quickly. And we moved very quickly.
Yeah, and I agree that that was one of the things that was an evaluation criteria, is how fast could we move to support them. And so I do agree with Shad, is that we probably should have pushed back more and said, hey, let's make sure everybody's speaking the same language, especially I think our frontline managers. That's one of our lessons learned that we'll talk about at the end, is that frontline sales managers, make sure they were all in agreement about the language that we were going to speak related to how we were going to talk about customers. Because it was that some manager raised their hand and would have the hot item of the day over 5 years, and somebody would add something to Salesforce.com, and so it grew and grew and grew.
Yeah.
But when we went through the process, Revegy made the pitch to Shad and his team. So I run corporate strategy. I'm a former key account manager, so I act as the SME, the subject matter expert internally about our product related to SAMs, CAM, GAM processes. And as a CAM, there were a couple things that I absolutely hated. So first off was the Excel spreadsheet that was our account plan that I had to fill out, which made me basically, as I got ready for the upcoming review session where I had to submit my plan, I basically became a CPA, right? Cut, paste, and attach. I was going to other systems, reports, other places, cutting stuff out and pasting it into the Excel plan. And then we got to the point where you actually had the QBR. After you've submitted your plan for review, you have to have the QBR. Well, that meant I had to repaste from Excel into PowerPoint because we had to do it as a presentation, right? So I really felt like I was mostly an administrative person as opposed to an actual key account manager managing a global $5 billion corporation customer. So that was one of the first things that Revegy decided to solve, is how do you pull data not just from Salesforce or your CRM, but the other places where it lives, to automate as much as possible of the population of the account plan. The value in account planning is not filling out the forms. The value is you coming up with your strategy to engage with the customer and the action plan that your team is going to execute against. And then doing that in a visual and collaborative way. The other thing that I really hated about the process was that I'd come up and do a review session, a quarterly business review. I'd go through my plan. I'd fill all kinds of flip chart pages with actions and ideas and put them up on the wall. And then all of you who are out there, either as my peers reviewing my plan or my management team, would say, good job, go get it, Tim, and y'all would walk out the door. And it was all on me to take care of all those flip chart pages and make some of that stuff happen. And so one of the things that we focused on is how do you actually get the team to collaborate so that your CAM is actually the captain of the team, right? I coached my daughter's soccer team for 10 seasons, right? We talk about the captain on the team calling the play, and everybody has to contribute. So those were some of the key things, and also the flexibility to do it the way Allscript wanted, not being diagnostic or prescriptive rather, and saying, hey, here's how you have to do it. So just from your perspective, and you've been in these shoes, they went through a formal RFP process, and this was the results, the readout that you then had to give to executive management, who said, why are you buying an account management and planning tool? We already have Salesforce.com. Doesn't it do that, right? And so you had to talk to them, and this is, I think, what you presented at the executive level. Yeah,
this is the exact document that was presented to our CFO, who controlled the funds for this particular effort. And the business needs are probably all the business needs that every company has. I don't think that we had found anything that, because of our industry or our particular situation, that was unique. I think what we had done, though, leading up to this point, was we had exacerbated some of the issues that are inherent in a company that grows by acquisition, in a company that is fragmented at the regional level. Anytime there was transition, particularly at the leader, but then also at the account level, we would essentially lose the data that we had. So all of these spreadsheets that I'm talking about, they were dependent on consistent associates across the board, quarter to quarter, year to year, and that's not realistic. And Salesforce, while you can attach documents and things like that, they're all dated, and they may or may not, from a management perspective, they may or may not have been kept up the way that they should have been. So I'll just read off a couple of these. The business need, this graphical interpretation of account relationships that's driven from Salesforce data. This is actually really important because we have a number of trade shows that we attend every quarter, really. And so we have our clients attend all of them. And every trade show had a different client-facing summary So a senior leader might be at the trade show and is going to attend a meeting with XYZ client. Well, that leader would require 5 elements of information that they wanted to have for that particular show. And so what had happened, just across the board, and it never failed, is those 5 elements would be completely different. Or maybe they were the same, but they wanted a different format. So the salespeople had to spend the time. I mean, trade shows like a bad word to some sales folks, because they've got to then recreate the account plan again to fit the format of the executive that's representing the company at the trade show. So we were able to eliminate that. Like at the top of the organization, our CEO prides himself on coming up with these really creative client summaries. And they are creative, and by creative I mean it takes a long time to create them. And so we've been able to mitigate that delicately, we've been able to mitigate that, and now we're following the same graphical user interface for all of these reports, which is really good. And we've since leveraged that into our quarterly business reviews. So that's our internal quarterly business. And then we also leverage it with our quarterly partnership review, which is our client-facing or external client meetings, and we do those quarterly. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that process.
And just so this was a little bit of what you talked about, there was an actual RFP process, and this is all in the PowerPoint, so you know that Revegy was the ultimate victor of that particular battle. But it was all the fun stuff, answer the RFP questions, come in, do the beauty contest, all the typical things you see. How many people here actually use Salesforce.com? Got you some more.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So you're familiar with this, right? This is basically the Salesforce.com screen. This is actually how you do, I apologize for the fuzziness, this is how you do stakeholder mapping. So these are people's names and their business role, like business user, economic buyer, those kinds of things. This is how you represent it in Salesforce.com. Frankly, I'm not aware of anybody who's a key account manager or a salesperson who likes filling out forms. And basically Salesforce.com is a really long form to fill out. And so the solution that I think most people like and embrace is something that works the way you think. And so this is what we brought to the table as the first and highest priority tool for Allscript to take a look at, which is stakeholder mapping within the Revegy application. Mm-hmm. So you said, when we went through what you guys do in terms of key account planning and management, you said that this was perhaps the most important tool. So talk about how do you actually use this in the field? Okay, great. Yeah, this is, I think so we have not completely eliminated the problem of each region, focusing on something that's more important than another thing. One of the things that I think is really important is the relationship map. And so this takes all your contacts in Salesforce and they're in Revegy, and basically you create this by dragging and dropping and then connecting. It's a simple tool to work with. People have probably used this kind of thing before. It's the first thing that I go to because I want to see the depth and breadth of the relationships that we have in our clients. And I want to know, through being represented by a picture like this, do people really understand how one works with the other? A lot of people don't dig down into the second layer to understand the true reporting, especially in healthcare, because sometimes it's a really matrixed organization. And so a graphic representation really helps understand where the influence is, meaning in a formal process for whatever you're trying to get done, who really is making the decision here. Because there are a number of times, especially in healthcare, where you could go three places down the line in an org chart, and what somebody thinks is the most important thing of the day, and if you don't do it, you're going to get thrown out. That may not be important at all to the person that they report to. And so this helps us understand and drill down into those questions. We also use it as, you'll notice the colors, we use this as a representation on how they feel about our company. So obviously green is positive and red is negative. One of the distinctions that we had to make though, and I think it's probably the ego of people just in general, they don't want to admit that they might have a red, because people think that this might be a representation of their relationship, and that's not the case at all. Like, we think it's important that you have a good relationship and that they like you, but whether or not they like you or not is not going to be the determining factor as to whether or not they continue to leverage Allscript as a client. So we really focus on what's the health of the relationship between Allscript and the senior executive or the person that is on the map. From that, we're able to
a plan around each of the relationships, and we can assign, of course, internal tasks to manage relationships that might be in the red. And so in terms of a weekly, getting a really quick management look at where we are with the relationship status, this is a great tool. Without us having to dig into, some 3/4 down the page line item in Salesforce that might have some activities that show a positive relationship is developing. That's just kind of a clunky way to do it, and this cuts to the chase. We use it in our quarterly business reviews. This is the first thing that we show, and we want to understand exactly what the relationships are and what our status is with each person. And this was what, you can, one of the cool things about this particular tool is you probably can't see it where you're sitting, but there's a link to LinkedIn, Twitter. You can email directly from here. So you can launch from here into their LinkedIn page, which is really pretty cool. That's a nice integration point that we felt was really beneficial.
Well, I also like the story that you told about the one account AOE account operation executive who came in and all the boxes were green.
Right.
And there was an interesting reaction to that.
Yeah, that's a good. Thanks for reminding me of that. So some this prideful thing that most salespeople or client owners have is they want all the relationships to be green. And so one fella showed up with and everybody was green. Everybody was green. And so in that kind of scenario, and I mentioned this yesterday, whenever we do these quarterly business reviews, we intend for them to be intense. We want people to be really aware, acutely aware of what their plan is, what they've done the past 90 days, and what they're going to do in the next 90 days, and what their vision and strategy is. So this fella came in with all green, and so the first question was, why is so-and-so green? And the answer was, well, I had a good lunch with them, and I think we've just got a good relationship. That's not what we're trying to do. Like that's nice that you have the lunch fed your ego. But how is that going to advance the business? And the simple statement was, if everything was green, then why is your white space so white? You should be able to fill with. If everybody loves you, then the target that we've assigned to that client, you should be easily be able to get to that target. And of course, once we dig a little bit further, the person backs off a little bit and says, well, I really don't know, I've just heard, et cetera, et cetera. So we were actually able to have a really good conversation around the people and what motivates the people.
So it became an effective coaching tool for you.
Yeah, exactly. So
this is, I'll talk about this one a little bit. This is a separate tool. It's a strategic imperatives map. And what we're mapping out here is, first and foremost, the customer's needs. So I'll read them because they're a bit fuzzy, but the customer, the specific hospital that we're referring to, and this is actually a real one from one of the real hospitals in the system, one of their imperatives is to meet government regulations, and then some key objectives in terms of achieving that improved population health imperative, meaningful use, ICD-9 readiness, et cetera. And then over here is cost reduction initiatives. So it's, one of the key themes of the SAMA conference is, co-creation of value. Well, you can't really create value until you understand what the customer's trying to accomplish and what they perceive as value. So this is a tool for the teams to actually understand what the customer's trying to achieve, and then what Allscript can potentially do to help them achieve those particular goals and objectives. Talk to me about how you use this. And you mentioned the term test. You use this as a test of how well the account manager is actually working with the customer at one time.
Yeah, there's two tests that I apply to this, and I know others do as well. And one is, do you understand what a strategy is versus a tactic? And a number of people will list things like upgrade Allscript EHR as a strategy, and that's not a strategy. So there is some really good coaching that this tool helps us facilitate. That's really important. The next is, do you understand what the strategies are of the client? And the way we test that is we ask who owns the strategy at the organization, who specifically, what senior executive will benefit from the execution of the imperative of cost reduction initiative by 2016, identifying $2 million in savings. This is a really cool tool, and you'll notice the difference on the left. The imperative is meet government relations, but there's no name attached to that. So that's the first cue is, okay, we don't know who is responsible for this goal, and we need to know that. But if you look on the right, on the cost reduction, you've got Maria Smith and Nick Johnson, who's the Chief Executive Officer. They are the individuals that have said that they are responsible for meeting this objective. And that is incredibly important, especially when we go back to the relationship map to find out, are they red, green, or yellow? How well do we really know them? If we have a solution, how easy is it going to be for us to go to that person's office and have an easy conversation? Or do we need to work down the chain in the org chart and find the green square, identify that person as the potential coach, and then use that methodology to build up the org chart so that by the time we get to the CEO, we've already built a consensus around these green boxes below, ideally, to then flip that potentially, let's call it a neutral relationship, into a positive relationship. That's how we use it. I mean, we try to be very systematic in the approach. And this just visually, especially for new associates, this is something I hired somebody within the last couple of weeks, and this is the kind of tool, especially in the ambiguous world of healthcare, where while it's slow moving, we're at the cross section of technology and healthcare. So healthcare is very slow moving, but technology is fast moving. Everything changes. It's hard to keep up. When we bring in and try to onboard new associates, it's typically very difficult. But this is one thing that we can really focus our new associates on, and it just happens to be the client. So inherently, it's a good, and it's something that these folks can dive into very early on in their Allscripts career. And you get to know the client much better through that process.
So one of the things that I hated was homework assignments, right? So I always felt an awful lot like that some of the account planning work that I did was a homework assignment. And you said that you actually take this tool and this tool out to the client themselves and collaborate with them. So talk about what that looks like and the value of doing that.
Yeah, and not everybody does this yet, but one of the cool things about this is that it actually is client facing. So there's nothing, when I said, these are not our strategies, that's another distinction that needs to be made to people that aren't used to going through this process is the client doesn't care what your strategy is for them. They want to work with you on their strategy. So we make that point very early on. And because it's their strategy, we want them to see this. And typically people are impressed that number one, we've invested in a tool that is going to be helpful in enabling the furtherance of their strategy. So I think clients view it as something that's a little deeper than what they may have thought. We're putting more strategic thought into the relationship than just, are you happy and what are you going to buy next? Which is kind of the transactional way that a lot of these clients have been dealt with in the past. So if you go to the relationship map as well, we show that to clients. And number one, clients, they want to, if they're not on the org chart, they of course want to be on the org chart. And they will help you build out this fantastic org chart because they're giving you all of the information. And this, candidly, this happened to me because the person at Revegy, who was the salesperson, we went through this process. And I was happy to tell, I felt like I'm going to help this guy. So I built out the org chart with him. And I was really impressed by the process. I was impressed that he was asking the question and he wanted to know the people. And then he also showed his perspective on the opinion that our people had of Revegy and the relationship. And so I was able to even validate some of those things, which was pretty helpful. He also showed me the sales stages, which was pretty cool. All of the activities had been recorded over the, probably 1 year that we spent evaluating. It took much longer than it should have. But it was a terrific tool. I was flattered by it. And I found that our clients, when we get to the next level, put some real structure around a quarterly partnership review. It's a great, not just a great leave behind, but it's a great working tool to put some structure around the client planning process. And we get facts, not just opinion.
Okay. So this is an analytic tool looked at two ways. One is to look at your penetration of your various products. So vertically is your specific product families, although this is a genericized example. And then the rows represent different regions that you penetrate in. Green is where your product is penetrated, red is where a competitor's in, white is open space, yellow is mixed, you and a competitor in the same space. So the software gives you the ability to look at this on an account by account basis, but it also allows you to roll this up across all of your accounts. How do you use, from a management perspective or an insight perspective, something like white space mapping? I mean, because you use that term an awful lot in your language to describe your business. So what does it mean to Allscript, and how do you use it?
So it's in terms of our journey, we're not at this level yet. We're not using this clean of functionality. Right now, we're keeping white space, and we're tracking white space by a master spreadsheet, which sounds crazy. And we know it's crazy, so that's a good thing. At least we know that we are crazy. But our goal is to get to this level. And just as a practical matter, as we're providing guidance to the street annually, we use our white space as evidence to support what our revenues are going to be in the next year. Now, we've got really smart people in accounting and finance that are building that out and making those projections based on sound business practices. But like as a practical matter, we need the field to have immediate access to that information. And we need to understand on the fly what the white space is for a particular account without having to go dig into the master spreadsheet to understand exactly what the white space is for a region or account. So our goal is to get to this level of understanding and this type of visual where we can very quickly send this to somebody, and they will, without having to spend much time at all, be able to assess the potential value of the particular client that we're working with. And just this week, a great example of why I think this functionality is beneficial. I was working with a client in New Orleans, and they're not happy right now. And when you talk about Louisiana and healthcare, they're under, anybody here from Louisiana? No? Okay. They're under immense pressure, their healthcare system is, because they basically slashed funding for all state Medicaid and things like that. And it is starving the healthcare providers there. It's amazing. So they're unhappy with us because we charge them money, period. They think it's more money than we should be charging them. We think it's right. They think that the software is not working the way it should. We think that they haven't maintained their training level to the optimum, level that it's proficiency that it should be. So anyways, we meet to talk about this. At the end of the day, we need to make an investment in this client to ensure that they're a sustainable client with Allscripts for the next 5 to 10 years, whatever it may be. So I'm going to invest $50,000 in this client. In the big picture, that's not a lot of money at all. But it's real people and it's airplane tickets, and I've got to go make that justification. It's very easy for me to make the justification for $40,000 or $50,000 when I can say, look at the white space of this potential client. There is, while we're going to invest $50,000 and 3 months of time to get them right, the upside is we'll have access to the $6 million in upside white space. And being able to tell that story with evidence, with an artifact like this, it makes things so much easier to make decisions like that. You don't have to have 5 meetings about whether or not we should or shouldn't spend this amount of money, because you can make the case very easy with something like this. I know it sounds simple, but at the end of the day, when I'm working with my CFO and our controllers, even at a regional level, the easier and the quicker we can present data to make decisions easier for them, the more fluid the entire process is going to be. So it's helpful to us.
Okay. So the one of my mentors told me, don't confuse activity with progress. And I take that to heart, because I personally think that the team-based action plan is possibly the most important portion of the planning exercise. What is everybody on the team going to be able to do? And you guys have a unique spin on it. So talk about your 30, 60, 90-day planning, and then how that fits in the context of an overall 3-year plan.
Okay, yep, thank you. So we actually customized this, which is very easy to do in the tool, which is what we liked. Again, we had our own methodology that we believed in and believe in. But we built basically a 30, 60, 90-day plan. So at every internal quarterly business review, after we've seen the people and the strategies, we get to the plan. We want to see the 30, 60, 90-day plan. How are you taking action on those things? And so top left, where it's green, it basically says 30-day plan. And then the plan builds out below that with due date, assigned to, and status. The assign to is really important because anybody that's a user on Revegy can be assigned tasks. So there is an accountability process, which is really helpful. Then we get to the 60-day and the 90-day plan. All of that leads up to a 3-year plan. Now, it's not going to have the tactics that you're going to see on the 30, 60, 90, but it will have a 3-year roadmap. And when you're implementing software, it's really important to understand the staging of the projects that are being proposed, particularly in the sales. As you're trying to build vision for any kind of future state, it's really helpful to have a 3-year plan. And this is a great way to manage the tool. People that do not have a 30, 60, 90-day plan don't execute on things. And so we're able to very easily drive this. And it's a good management tool.
So the other thing that you were looking for was a standardized process, right? So one of the things that the software provides is lay out the process for you, whatever your process may be. So what's the current state with the customer? What's our potential future state? Then actually go collaborate with the customer around the account plan, and then go through and test progress every quarter.
Yep.
Now there's two things in this. The first one I want to ask you about is talk a little bit about what's very important to you guys is your QBRs and your QPRs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll start with the new associate example. So this is the roadmap to the client plan, basically, and it's a building blocks tool. And so when I say to the new associate, go into Revegy, go to the client plan, go to the basically the roadmap, we start in the far left, and it's build the account plan. At each stage, there are verifiable activities that they can attach documents to if needed. If there's some external piece of information that's needed, it can be attached to that particular stage. But it also verifies to me as management that they've executed that particular activity. So we go through the process. This is not ours, this is an example. But we have customized each of the activities along the way. Again, that goes back to the methodology thing. So we've been able to personalize our account planning to the tool. And at each stage, you'll notice this is a paperclip, so you can attach. This says internal QBR. If there's any exhibit that needs to be attached, you can attach it here. There's also tools where you can adjust, and this is actually a checkbox. But what you don't see below this is the verifiable outcome. So as a tool, once I've validated that these activities have happened and that the quality is there that we expect, I go below and I check the box as a verifiable outcome, all of which you can report on. And from a methodology standpoint, this has been 180 degree. This has been a 180 degree change from the process that we had in the past, because basically we didn't have a process. Every account planning session was different. Every what Tim mentioned is a QPR, that's a quarterly partnership review. Every one of those was different. And that was one of the key, if there are 5 principles that we said we have to drive out of this process, is one of them is we need to deliver a standard quarterly partnership review with every client. And this is the process by which we do that. So we're ensuring not just that it happens, but that it's following our prescribed methodology for the quarterly partnership review. So when we get to the QBR, the quarterly business review, that's when we publicly assess that all of these things are happening. And we find examples of people that are doing it really well, and of course we recognize them. We ask them to speak on their experience. How has this helped you as a result of the process? All the normal kinds of build consensus things that you would normally do with any software project in particular.
But you go through the process, the QBR internal, then QPR
That's
actually
right.
Go do it with the customer
That's
themselves.
Right. Yep. QBR, quarterly business review, QPR, quarterly partnership review. And so this is the data. Okay, so this is our data, and you'll notice at the top it says Q1 2016 quarterly partnership review. And the numbers, when I first saw this, I was really surprised because I thought the numbers would be much higher. But what you're looking at is, this is grayed out. This represents the different business units within the company that are all doing something that's client facing. So you can see from an adoption standpoint, we're not where we need to be just yet. I can tell you that the 88%, that's my organization. That's the Allscript Outcomes Executive Organization. I frankly thought that would be very near 100%, so I was surprised it's just at 88%. The report that I use is not necessarily a global report. I focus on the South, and so I have a very good understanding of what's happening in the South. But I was surprised by this, frankly. But it's a terrific way across the organization to assess, how deeply the tool is being used across the org, and it's really helpful. So, as the owner of 60 clients in the South representing X millions of dollars, the report that I like to see shows the associate all of their clients and then this dashboard. And there are a number of other metrics that aren't shown here. You saw one slide ago, you saw the different green boxes where you have the ability to check. It gives you a status on all of those things. So this is a really, if you want to see if people are paying attention to their client planning process, that's a really good way to do it across the company.
And so Shad said he was shocked by this, and I said I actually wasn't shocked, right? Because they've grown through so many acquisitions. There's so many cultures intrinsic in their company right now. It's going to take them a while to get everybody pointing in the right direction. And the outcome executives they're the bigs, right? They're the
yeah, that's right. They're the fighter pilots. They're the guys that are doing all the cool stuff. So, just from a methodology standpoint, and how we're building consensus, we've incentivized our Allscript Outcomes executives to execute on these plans. Okay, thank you. So this is
one of the things I thought was really cool as part of their implementation. I didn't think about this, and I thought it was an amazing idea.
Cool. Go. I want to hear your.
No. Okay. It's like your story. You tell it. I'm just telling them it was cool.
Oh, I just like how good it sounds. This sounds like really a low bar to jump, low-hanging fruit. But we compensated people for completing a client plan. So we compensated people for completing their relationship map. Now, we gave them guidance. We said, these are the 15 roles that we want you to go build a relationship with, and you need to represent them on the relationship map. But when they proved that they did it, at the end of the quarter, and we staged the compensation accordingly, we didn't say in Q1 you have to have your account plan completely built. We staged it over the course of the year. Q1, we want to understand the people and the strategies. And once you prove that you've done that, we're going to release a certain amount of compensation to you. So, in my mind, that's like the easiest job in the world, and we had to get over internally just the idea that we were paying people to do something that should be a reflex. How can you possibly be successful unless you're recording these things? But because it was a new tool, because we were changing the way we think about it, we decided we were going to compensate on it. I think it helped. These are some of the what we call operational excellence objectives. So the AOE has to get his or her OEOs, which is the mnemonic joke around Allscripts, because we want to apply an abbreviation or a mnemonic to everything. But basically it's completing your white space report, executing and understanding and delivering on strategic imperatives, developing a strategic roadmap, etc. And so I think that one of the things that we know we did right was compensating for that activity. It's a good adoption model.
Yeah, so I thought that was a unique change management element, because anytime you introduce new technology, it is a change. And we actually automated a portion of this so that the managers could, in the context of looking at the plans online, could actually do their assessment right there, and it was recorded for all time. Yeah,
and so we should add to that too. So most of these people were becoming, rather than maybe a transactional salesperson, they were becoming more of a strategic account manager. And so one of the major changes was if they're 100, they have a variable comp component, we were taking basically 20% of that variable comp that was achieved through sales and paying that based on these qualified and qualitative measurements. That was a major change in how these folks were used to operating. In my mind, it was easy money, but in their mind, it was you're taking away some of my sales upside, etc. I didn't see it that way, ultimately it's ended up being a really good thing. But there was absolutely a change, and some people didn't like it. And our company is like any other, the sales associates or the people managing the accounts, the clients. They're not just dying for another tool. They're not just dying, for another data entry process or product. So we motivated people through incentivizing them with money.
Okay. So we're going to coast into the close here.
Okay.
Lessons learned. What would you do differently?
The methodology, I think I mentioned probably early on, the methodology. I wish we had pulled the throttle back just a little bit. We were so excited about our program and what we were doing and thought we were so smart. I wish we had been a little more introspective, spent a little bit of time really understanding our process and are we doing things the right way. If you could, recreate it, would you do it the same way that we had been doing it? I think universally people would say no, we would do it much differently. So in some respects, we've automated bad processes and we're working through that. So, it is, and Tim, I attended one of the sessions yesterday and it was kind of what went right, what went wrong for the creation of a strategic account management program. We did everything that was listed as what most people do wrong. I was glad to know that other people did the same things. So we're working through all of those things, but now we have a standard and we're building our methodology as we go along, which is fine, but I wish we had built it to begin with, so we had a much firmer foundation. I note here technically ready, and I mean that because as a company that's grown through acquisition, we have a number of different systems out there. We've got all kinds of technology, but I mentioned our Salesforce instance is a mess. There's a bunch of data that we didn't want in Revegy. And there were some internal arguments over what data was important and what's not. Revegy can take just about anything. But I wish we had cleaned up Salesforce to begin with. I wish we had suppressed a bunch of fields that were there that are legacy fields from some company that thought that was important 10 years ago. We could have cleaned up a bunch of that so the project could have been made much cleaner. And particularly when we get to thinking about white space and contracts, we have Oracle for all of our contracting. All of our contracts are different. It's sometimes hard to get to. It's not reflected in Salesforce. So I wish we had cleaned some of that up to begin with. That's an enormous project. It's an enormous project, but that's the ideal state, I think. That would have made things a little bit better for us. And finally, getting management involved. I don't want you to think that management was not involved, but the way that our project, we were very fast. I think we were up in 3 months or something like that, Tim. Of course, we invited management, and I mean, the regional leaders, et cetera, to help in the build process. But CRM, hey, we've got a new CRM project we want you to come help us with. That's not the most sexy thing that a person wants to participate in. If you're a salesperson, you've got a number you're trying to hit, or you got client fires you're trying to put out. I wish we had spent more one-on-one time with the middle manager, with the middle managers, and some of the bottom-up people to build even greater consensus and more specific build even to what regionally they might have been doing. That was very good. So we had the top-down figured out. For all of the virtuous reasons, we want, standard methodology. We want to understand across the board what our clients look like. We want to be able to measure progress at the associate level, and we want to really drive to this quarterly partnership review process. All that's good, but I wish we had spent more time with management doing a kind of a bottoms-up consensus building activity, which again, we went through that process. We made an effort at it. I wish we had incentivized them specifically, given them money to go help to build and deliver, because people really start caring when you incentivize them for it.
Okay, cool. So those are the end of the prepared remarks. Do we have any questions from anybody? Young lady in the front.
Yes, yeah, thanks. So the question was, elaborate on the difference between a QBR and a QPR. So I'll start with the QBR. That's the quarterly business review. And that typically happens at the beginning of the quarter, and we're doing the 90-day projection. And we go through each client, we go through each client plan. The quarterly partnership review happens once a quarter with every client. It's a requirement that every client go through the quarterly partnership review process. We go through the 30, 60, 90-day plan, the strategic imperatives. We understand the relationship map, get their perspective to make sure that we're still good. Have there been any changes in personnel? Any informal changes in influence? And I didn't talk about this, but on the relationship map, I mean, there are descriptors that will show you who is an influencer, who is the decision maker, who's the technical buyer, that kind of stuff. So we validate all those things. The biggest piece that comes out of it, and the most valuable from my perspective, is the strategies, the 30, 60, 90, and then the 3-year plan. If we get validation each quarter on those things, we know we're going to be moving the client forward in a good way. And so that's the difference.
And I applaud them for that, because I firmly believe that's a best practice, right? If your clients don't want you to do something to them, they want you to do something with them, and getting buy-off on that journey that together is crucial. Lady in the second table.
Yeah, I really love the visual of the relationship management. How is that information inputted? You said it should be easy. I do use Salesforce.
Yep.
I put all that in. It's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some of the tools are actually generated automatically, based upon the underlying data. So things like the white space maps and things like even the relationship maps, our organizational hierarchy and the people on it can be automatically generated.
From where?
From if the data exists,
Okay.
right? So that's always a question: is the underlying data there? So one of the things on a white space map, I'll tell you that for 99% of our customers, the competitive information is not stored in a system. It only lives in the key account manager's head. So that piece is manually inputted as to this bit of business is owned by a specific competitor, right? Everything else we're trying to harvest from internal systems. Do you want to speak to the time it takes to build a map and those kind of things?
Yeah, it's so I'll start with our training. We carved out a day and a half of training at our annual kickoff meeting in January. This was January last year. And every Allscripts Outcomes executive came with a client they were going to build a client plan for. So all the data that was already in Salesforce, when you engage the Revegy tools, all the contact data specifically will show in Revegy. So when you go to the contact map, you basically drag and drop, and you build out the org chart there. And it doesn't take much time at all. I mean, how much time, I don't know. But if it took you an hour, I would be really surprised to build something like that. Same with the strategies.
From scratch, the first time through.
From scratch.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really simple. If the data's in Salesforce, then it's pretty easy.
Gentleman up front.
2 questions, and I have some familiarity with your business. I'm in the pharmaceutical business.
Sure, okay.
We have action steps.
No, yeah. So we've been live about a year, just short of a year and a half, I guess. So we don't have a whole lot of historical data just yet. And I think what you're saying is a result really of just some select screenshots. But one of the things that I think is cool is when you look back at all of the activities, you can see and I tend to focus on sales process, but in the sales process, the activities that we think are important, the number of days that a certain action takes before it's being accomplished is really cool to see. So from contract or from solution demonstration to contracting, how many days does that take? If it's 6 months and we're in the demo stage, then we're doing something wrong. And we need to go shorten that time frame. So we look at that kind of retrospective data, but we don't have enough yet to really put any meaningful analysis to it yet.
The other
It's making sure that we use Revegy during our quarterly business reviews. At minimum, it needs to be the tool that's used in real time during our quarterly business reviews. And again, I think I mentioned that people would spend a couple of days building these PowerPoints on what they're doing, this and that. Now it's all there. The part where we have a gap, and I'm victim of this too, get so busy doing other things that we don't use it as a management tool enough. So it's really on management to, when we're doing our individual or team meetings, actually using Revegy And when someone's talking about their client, pulling Revegy up on the WebEx and saying, okay, blah, 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 and going through the actual process. That's the thing that, and I was telling Tim this, we need to have complete integration and buy-in from even our field intelligence team. So the people that do the training in our company, they need to be oriented in and to understand what the goal is, to put training classes forward, et cetera. So we've gone through the momentum of getting this thing up and the excitement of the cool, user interface and all that stuff. Now we need to follow it up with making sure that management is actually using it. But that's
one of the things that they did that was really cool is they actually conduct their quarterly business reviews, the internal reviews, online. And so they're actually using the tool and making changes to the tool live and in real time as they go through that. So I call that driving it into the operational processes. The other piece that they do, which is a best practice, is actually doing it with the customer. So things that you do in your office that you're forced to do because you've got a deadline and a requirement and a compliance issue is not very valuable, but if it's actually something you're doing it with the customer, then it becomes a high value activity on both sides of the equation, which they do, which is also another best practice. And then one of the things that we have been able to help them with is the Pareto rule. I had somebody come to me with a 50-page account plan and say, hey, can you automate this 50-page account plan inside Revegy? And I said, absolutely, we can automate that 50-page account plan. And nobody will ever use it, right? It will be the most beautiful, automated, worthless piece of junk possible. So what is the 20% of this process that we need to execute on that's actually going to move the needle and give us 80% of the results? There's lots of data that we could capture about customers that's really, really interesting. But unless it actually drives the specific outcomes that we're seeking with our customers, it's not of value. So those were 3 pieces of advice that we gave to Allscript that I think they actually executed quite well on. Any other questions? Yeah, so the tool is designed to pull data from whatever sources because your account plan is, in the final analysis, a really good account plan is an analytic tool. Right? It's the data that you've pulled from multiple sources, your data warehouse, your financial systems, contract systems, et cetera. It's aggregated that so that your key account managers are not doing data entry and doing CPA work, but are actually doing analysis and coming up with a strategy and actions, which is the most important thing that the teams should be doing. Any other questions? Way, way, way back.
How long did you consent your folks to get the data in the system?
we still are, actually.
So for like the first whole year,
The-
or do you plan to go beyond that?
The first year, yes. Now, in this year, we're not incentivizing people for completing the client relationship map, et cetera. The incentive is that you have delivered the client plan collaboratively with the client. And so that's and then we measure by quarter, and it's a requirement every quarter. So that's, we haven't thought about how we're going to incentivize use in 2017, but we are progressively going to make it much more, difficult is probably the wrong word, but it's not going to be as easy as, hey, complete the relationship map. It's going to be deliver on, some sort of client event. That will be measured in Revegy, and I'm not sure that I mentioned this or not, but our compensation team has access to Revegy. They pull reports, so whenever the boxes are checked and you saw the red, what I thought was too much red, not enough green, that jelly bean map, they're pulling that report, and that's what they're basing compensation on. So it is getting used beyond just the client-facing team.
Anybody else? You guys were a great audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.